Cool. Recording's on, so we're good to get started whenever.
Cool. I can cue us up a little bit, Ned, if you want to add anything to it. You're welcome to, and then we'll pass it over to Tica to do the demo part. And depending on how many people show up, again, like the idea was to be office hours, to be like reacting to and just showing up to whatever people brought with them. So we'll see how many breakouts we need to keep the kind of size the right size for conversation. I think, as I understand it, how we're going to present the demo today is about understanding what kind of like building blocks or primitives credit designers and builders might use to base their projects on. Hey, Sam. So what does that look like in terms of using precedent, knowing where to find precedents, what composes those precedents, and how an approach to designing a methodology might react to them, extend them, interpret them or synthesize them in some way. So I think that has been a part of the process that maybe not necessarily like hasn't been discussed enough, but is really helpful. And however internal or external that sync is around like what are the primitives that we're using to comprise methodologies and eco-credits seems really, really relevant. So yeah, I'm very excited for this because I feel like it's a long time coming. And it's the reason we've made this call to like, get into stuff like this. So yeah, I don't have more to add. Ned, if you want to touch anything off, otherwise we'll pass it over to Tica.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think basically it's just a need that we saw, and I think Tica is an excellent person to present this, and hopefully we'll have some discussion afterward.
Yeah, thanks guys. And so I guess the way I'm approaching it is I feel like there's been quite a lot of work done by the registry team to kind of gather resources. So I spent a little time updating those and just want to walk folks through where those are and how to use them, and then can take some questions after that. So let's see, I can share my screen. Yeah, let's see. Oops, my screen is being weird, but let's see. All right, can everybody see?
I think it'd be cool if you could share for a second about your role, like how you manage the methodology development process.
Yeah.
More
Yep.
broadly.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah. So I have been at Regen for 3 years, and during that time, we've had several methods developed by our team or in collaboration with project developers, methodology developers, and our team. And it's kind of run a few different ways as far as what people have brought to the table, and then how we've assisted them in moving through the process to issue credits. So we've had folks come with very loose, kind of vague concept notes, and then we'll give some feedback on those. And then they'll come, we have some dialogue, they'll come back a few months later or a year later with a method that they've developed. That method, again, can be very fleshed out or sometimes a little less so. And our internal team will again give comments on that, and it'll go back and forth until we feel it's ready to be passed off to expert reviewers. At that point, I'll source expert reviewers with the help of the registry and science team, giving input into who's needed and maybe context that they have. And that again will be a back and forth between the method developers and our expert reviewers. And sometimes we'll need to help guide that process a little bit more if there's questions between the two, if there's issues that can't seem to be resolved, then the internal team will step in and help to resolve those. And then the last piece is a public comment that's a few weeks, 2 weeks at the end. And that's, again, open to the public to comment on And the developers are required to respond to all those comments, but there's less back and forth. But it's all of that whole process is then documented, and all of the drafts and the comments are uploaded into the final method in our library, and I'll get to that in a moment. So yeah, and I'm going to kind of walk through this page and then circle back to that method library, because that's ending up being a really great source of, kind of, Austin was saying, primitives of ideas where method developers can go and read through those and then help inform their own method development. So Becca and I actually worked on this a while ago now, and I spent some time the last few days updating it. And it's a great resource just to kind of, again, guide people through mainly our resources, and then points to the more in-depth processes that I'll jump to. So we assist in the development of methods to sell ecological credits. We did write the Carbon Plus Grasslands, but since then we've moved into more of a assisting and review focus instead of actually writing methods ourselves. And our handbook is going to tell more about that process, and I'll get into that again in a minute. And then our final place where those credits that we've issued with the folks we've collaborated with is our marketplace. The ledger holds all of the information about that process, as well as the data that's collected to issue the credits. So all the monitoring reports, the project plans, all that really meaty backbone that goes into making sure the credits are high integrity. And our credits are nature-based solutions that can have several definitions. I think Becca put this in here, a little bit more clarity on how we're interpreting that, and some examples of the projects that we work with, oops, sorry, I need to add an E in there, that we tend to focus on, that we really feel are doing ecosystem regeneration work in a very pointed way. Of course, looking at a more holistic system, all of these other examples are going to help regenerate ecosystems, but just not in as direct of a way that we tend to focus on. And then, so let's get into a little bit about the processes. The first step is submitting a concept note. And then once you do that, as I said, it goes into our process of developing that method with some help of our internal team, and then the review process with the expert reviewers. Then we're going to need monitoring service providers. So as you're developing a method, you want to think of who you're going to work with to actually collect the data to create the credits. And those credits, we started with carbon, and now we've really branched into a lot more biodiversity, biocultural credits. So let's look at a few of these resources, as Austin was suggesting, sort of primitives. And these are all, there are links out to these here. So exploring the credit classes and methodologies, if you click this button, you'll see our internal methods that we've developed are here. There's also a list of this methodology developers who are external to our organization, but a great resource to read through. So if you've got an idea for a method, I would highly suggest popping into some of these and just looking through what the initial submission looked like. That's going to show you what they started with, what the internal review process looked like, the expert review process. This had several rounds, and then the public comment. So the documentation of the process is here. That can inform you not only of what that process looks like, but also if you find something that's similar to what you're doing and you read through this process, probably a lot of your questions are going to be answered. Or you can say, oh, I had that in my method and look, they've addressed it here and yep, it's good to keep in, or I should adjust it this way. I need to add more detail here. So the fact that this process is here, you'll see a lot of back and forth with comments and questions and answers that can really help inform you on all the points that are needed in a method and any questions you might have about anything from calculations to how data is collected and what kind of data needs to be collected. And then the same with if you go into any of these other organizations, they're going to have similar process documentation that can help you. And or for say, let's see, it was the Colshan Carbon Trust actually used a Vera methodology and did an appendix. It was a larger scale biochar method that was authored by some folks through Vera, and they wanted to adapt it to better fit their bioregion as well as a smaller scale. So they reached out to the authors of that method and asked for permission to use it, and then created an appendix. And we helped them through that process of connecting with the authors, what they needed to get from those authors to show, use of the IP. And then lastly, we did the review of the appendix with them. So that's another way to approach it. Basically, all of this is saying that, we're not, you're probably not starting with an idea that's never ever been thought of or processed or batted around between somebody somewhere. So looking through all of this can really help you to guide you and to look for inspiration and have you feel like you aren't starting with that blank slate, which can be a little intimidating. The other place, let's see, sorry, I'm getting a little lost here. So the other spot, which Becca really spearheads this, is our Hilo. And I don't know if you can put a link into that, Becca, our Hilo community. And you can see when you pop in there, here's the different streams of method developer conversations that are happening right now. So great spot to go in and say, hey, I'm working on this method. I'm working in this region. Does anybody have any suggestions? And connect with our larger community. And then of course, hopping into these calls. And also we have a couple of YouTube channels. So these are going to go through, this is our larger Regen Network channel. And then we have recordings from the Eco Builder Lab as well. So all great resources to inform and connect you with the larger community. And I'd say that is a key piece, hop onto our Twitter feed, our LinkedIn, our live Twitter sessions that we have, see who's attending them, reach out to those folks, look into what they're doing and find people to connect with. So you don't feel like you're doing this on your own. So yeah, I'll stop there and see if we have some questions.
I feel like I have a question for you. It's like you interact with a lot of people that are going through this process and you're seeing the different kind of like strain points or the different, I feel like the different like cases and how much resources like certain groups might have going into this. What are some of the common kind of patterns that you see, the things that you would want to remind people of during that process, or like kind of do's and don'ts now that you've done this for quite some time?
I think really taking the time to do this upfront research is really, really helpful. We have a pretty wide array of folks coming into us, not only now from biodiversity to carbon, but also just at different levels of organizations, you know, folks that are backed by big universities, or folks that are really trying to do this with a very small group. And so, especially for those trying to do this with a smaller group, really doing this and looking through the methods and saying, oh, okay, now I understand what is needed, you know, and we also have that in here in our handbook, in submitting the method. So it's gonna, you know, again, point to the method library and then these additional resources. So to me, that's really important, because otherwise we get methods that just simply don't have the points that need to be covered. And that can really slow things down. So if you're aware of the building blocks that need to go in a method, that's super, super helpful. And then, you know, I think as we've worked as a team and we've come into communication with so many more people, just being able to attend these meetings and say, hey, I'm working in this, like we can shoot you some information because we've probably talked to somebody about it. So being open to a conversation and not waiting too long to do that, to look for collaboration, I think is really important as well. And getting into that, like once you're ready to submit ideas, you can do that through these submission forms that are all here in this in the handbook. So that really guides you through that work. I think the other thing is looking at larger organizations like IAPB or the biodiversity coalitions. You know, and reading through, keeping up to date on standards that are being created through those larger organizations, and participating in those conversations. A lot of them have open calls for feedback on what they're creating that's going to guide the larger markets and the standards. And I think being involved in those is really important. You know, there is the chance to jump in on the conversations and weigh in on where the guidelines and standards are going, and also be informed. So I would say participating in those where and when you can is great to do.
That's great advice.
I'm curious if you can walk us through what, if any, are the existing repositories or collections of methodologies that like are open source or are accessible to people in the early phase of research. And kind of an addendum to that, like what entities are producing credits in a, say, like traditional climate finance context, as you know, that we're tapping into and building on top of and evolving. Where are the bodies of credits that people can look at, and like what kinds of entities are producing them? Is there like a kind of format that they follow that seems reproduced across different methodologies? Is, I guess, my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing some variation now between, especially with the biodiversity credits. But I would say, you know, our methods are open source, so great place to read through. And then contact those authors if you have questions about using the method and or adapting the method. And then other ones, you know, it might not say open source specifically, but technically contacting the authors is what needs to happen. So if you reach out to those authors and they say, yes, you have the right to, you know, use this method, that's the key piece of authorization that you need to get to be able to use and or build upon a method. There's kind of a gamut there as far as some organizations are building out their own programs and standards from top down. And they, I would say, tend to be kind of narrowly focused. They're doing like afforestation, reforestation. They're kind of working within a smaller scope of credits, maybe like a Pro Earth or 44 moles. So yeah, it just depends on what you are focusing in on, and then look for folks who are working in that same field. Does that answer your question, Austin?
Yeah, I'm also just curious if there's like URLs of like methodologies, even if they're not open source, that you can look at, that people can just see what's out there. Like, how do you sense make in the larger field?
Yeah, so that's kind of this list here. So like Terrazos, right? Their biodiversity credit, if you click on here, that's going to take you to their source. It's going to show you their methods here, active VCS methods, modules, and tools. So you can click in there and you can start to do the same kind of a research, go through their papers. This organization has a lot of more like alternative energy, but they do have a few afforestation and reforestation. So you can open this up again and just go ahead and click on this, and it's going to bring you to the method. And you can read through that. And usually most of them also have, I would say, I don't want to say usually most of them, but quite a few of them do have the same history of what they went through in the review process. CAR. So you can just, again, click in here, pull up the protocol, and read through it. Is that what you were asking, Austin?
Yes, thanks.
Great, yeah. So I did update that list in the last couple of days, and there's more. This was just kind of a getting started places to go and read through methods. Yeah.
I just kind of want to echo that idea of using that process, the logging process that Tica manages for the review of different methodologies. You know, using that as a knowledge resource. It's, to be honest, I never really thought of it that way, and that's kind of a lack of my own perspective, I guess. I've always just thought, you know, we're doing that for transparency, and that's kind of like checking a box. But the value is really in knowledge. There's so much, just looking through that whole process, you know, thinking about it, there's a lot there. So like, just to echo what Tica was saying, I think that's, you know, we should really think of that as a knowledge resource. And also, as folks are going through the process, if you have feedback, please let us know, because we are trying to just infer with the process, and we do get feedback occasionally, but it's infer what the needs are. But if we can get direct feedback that says, it would really be helpful if I had something like this or that, we listen to those comments and do try to address them.
Yeah, and we've been asked several times to develop a method template, and we've tried. But the thing that is tricky is that as you read through these, you're going to see there's a lot of variation. So really, we built this library and have all this documentation because we felt it was a more effective way of guiding folks than having one particular template, which may be helpful to some, but then could be discouraging to others if that template wasn't really working for them. And they're saying, why isn't this working for me? Well, it's not appropriate for the project that you're doing. And we're just seeing more and more diversity. So yeah.
I don't know if there's any demand to answer Jimo's question in the chat. I don't know the context from that. Maybe others don't either.
Yeah, and thanks, Sam. I meant to put in Simus's. I'll go ahead and add that link into the method library. That was on my mind this morning. Didn't get to it. So he's got a list of the biodiversity credit schemas, which is great to look at. Where is Ecocredit development?
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail the conversation. I just thought it was appropriate
you're
to
not.
ask in this setting.
You're not derailing.
I know I've looked into the invest programs, not for a bit of time. And I know Ned has as well. Have you been into that space recently, Ned?
Not recently. I mean, when I was working at for the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation, we used some of those models occasionally and also worked with people using them, but I haven't used them myself since I've been with Regen, but I know other people that have been developing methodologies have considered integrating some of those models into the methodologies. I just don't remember. I'm sorry, Jimo. I just don't remember which models they were most interested in. But yeah. And just, it would be good to hear more about this, but before you go, it would also be good to, because you were at that meeting they had a week or two ago. And if you'd have, a couple of minutes to talk about that, because that's something we've considered Regen people getting more involved in some of that stuff. It would be great to hear your recap, and if that's something that you would recommend folks at Regen actually engage with more.
Yeah, absolutely. So just quickly for context, our work in Miami, is looking to evaluate natural capital accounting of trees in the context of resilience models like thermal tolerances and associated cooling effects, stormwater runoff, wind tolerances, even like salinity or salt tolerances. And so a lot of the models like urban cooling and stormwater runoff are relevant frameworks to kind of inform potential eco-credit development. So I was inquiring on whether anyone who's leveraging that work. Also, Natural Capital Project seems to be quite eager now, with many models now developed to address interoperability and API integrations and even like GIS level collaboration. So yeah, just was very impressed by the team. Continues to grow. My recap is that more than anything, it was a convening of very interesting people. Most of whom I think are in the same work and theme as Regen Network, perhaps wearing less Web3 hats, but nonetheless, I think working in the same space. And I couldn't help but think while I was there and listening to the works coming out of the development banks that they should absolutely know the most recent efforts for the biocultural credits, but even others. And so I was just offering that introduction, which I shared on the chat, but it sounds like you're already connected. I forget his name, but he gave quite an inspiring talk. And yeah, ultimately it was just trying to facilitate some intros, but I absolutely do think Regen Network should have a presence at NetCap, and not just have a presence, but really speak and share the work, because I think the audience there would be quite inspired by it.
I think probably with this group, we could just break into like 2 breakouts. Does that make sense for the size?
And I know that Tica has to run. So if you have any last thoughts,
Yeah.
Tica, that you want to impart with any folks that are considering or are already building methodologies, feel free to do so before we jump into breakouts.
No real follow-ups, but it's great to be here and see people participating. And I think these spaces that we have for connections are really, really important to help. And I mean, we just want to scale the regenerative ecosystem work that's being done. And the best way to do that is to collaborate and to, not feel like we're starting from ground zero. And I think this is a big piece of it, along with libraries. And, as Sam was saying, we could explore more open source because we have limited time. There's so much happening all the time with new resources. So that could be a fun thing to explore as well. And great to hear about the NatCap work. I wins that we're super connected with them. I don't know though, Gregory maybe, or maybe more. Certainly something we've been really interested in getting more involved in. So that'd be fun to follow up with as well.
Yeah, I think COP16 will be a great opportunity to maybe see a lot of those folks again. And yeah, I'm also following closely your efforts there, and hope to see you in person.
Cool. Maybe with that, we can pivot to breakout sessions. Like I said, I think 2 is probably okay. We had an idea for like keeping 1 breakout just like generally open for discussion. And like people new to the space or like wanting open prompting. And we had the idea of making a dedicated breakout room related to credit methodology design, in partnership with purchasers from like a supply chain perspective, and trying to discuss what does it look like to think through credit design with supply chains. And that's some work that many of the people on the call are talking about, and Nena from the foundation is working on too, with some of the Regen Foundation partners. So maybe we can make the first breakout specifically around like supply chain and like credit design with purchasers. And the second one, like I can lead that one, or be the backstop to it. That's a more like general discussion around credit design. And I'm happy to keep kind of like digging in on this question around how we take existing methodologies off of the shelf and research, cut them up, research them, edit them, use them as a sort of building blocks to make new methodologies. And I'm also, of course, happy to talk about anything else. Does that sound generally good to folks to have those 2, and then you can just self-select where you want to go?
I can create the other breakout. We can kind of see where folks move.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So I'll just create 1 breakout room, and you'll be able to select manually to pop in there. I can stay in the main room as well and help with kind of the Regen 101 or continuing with methodology talk. And Ned, would you want to join Nena with the insetting and that conversation? Sweet. Okay.
I think it would be cool in the supply chain insetting conversation to give a broad introduction of what those terms are, the tensions around the usage of the terms, to like allowing it to be a space to kind of start from first principles there.
Yeah, I thought I could have given maybe like a brief introduction of what we have been working with Suma, who's also on the call right now from Radis, just so
Yeah,
that people
great.
have context of what has been developed and what can they expect out of the breakout room. So insetting has been described in many different contexts by many different organizations, but just to gain clarity, we started with describing insetting as a framework through which different stakeholders can engage and understand how they can participate in it. So it's like one broad category is, of course, like the earth regenerators that are regenerating various landscapes. And the other is, let's say, brands, or we are calling them brands because it's generally what these are the kinds of businesses that generally run a product specific supply chain. And in this case, we are, of course, referring to physical goods of any kind, like furniture, clothes, shoes, makeup products, and not any kind of digital product services that may also call themselves supply chain, but it's not relevant in this context. So we developed this very vague, brief introduction based on our conversation with GVK and Radis Cotton. And we're starting to describe that. And at the space and the position that we are at now, we just have a lot of questions that we want to brainstorm with the larger community to understand what is the best way to approach this. So this is a model where you have some kind of data structuring happening both from the brands and from the Earth Steward side to understand how the credit design would make sense in that particular context, and also bring legibility for a lot more different kinds of methodologies to come, like legibility in the sense of like market sellability legibility, I would say, which is not just limited to GHG emissions, but looks at like a broader thing on how we can regenerate different landscapes that are destroyed by supply chains. So yeah, this is just an idea we've been playing around with and would be good to discuss and hear your thoughts.
Sounds great. Okay, so maybe Ned and Nena can be the anchor points for the new room, and folks who want to stick around and talk about what we've done so far, or more broad introductions, can stay here.
In the meantime, I'd like to just say hi. My name is Alvain. I'm based in Cape Town. I'm with the EXO team. I know that there's a long history with like EXO and Regen being the OGs in the Regen space. That's amazing. And so happy to meet all of you. I wanted to ask, so my interest is not so much in what Regen is working on. It's more around renewable energy and that space. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts around methodologies? And I'm quite new to the methodology space as well. I don't understand it that well. So I'm really looking for guidance and support in terms of where to go and for improved methodologies around, for example, cooking stoves and that space, solar energy, all of that. Where would one go and look for the best methodologies?
Maybe we can stay here and
Right.
get into that, and you all can do your thing.
Yes,
Um,
so
yeah.
I'm not actually able to create another breakout room once they're already established. So Giselle, do you mind to actually pop your Zoom link, and we can just pop out for a few minutes and then come back just so that we can meet? Does that work? Okay, sweet. And then Austin, do you, since you're co-host, you're good, just ping me on Slack. Okay, sweet. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, bye-bye. Just, I think we can just assume to convene like 10 minutes before the top of the hour, or 10 minutes before the end of the meeting. Yeah, right on. Yeah, so help me know how to pronounce your name again. Alwyn.
Alwyn is fine, yeah.
It's a nice name. Hi, nice to meet you. Yeah, we're definitely old friends of the EXO team, so it's cool to meet new EXO people. You know, I'm not like an expert in collecting and like querying different existing methodologies, but that I know of, most of the ways that like renewable energy type credits have been integrated into the climate financial space is to ultimately make some argument that goes back to like GHG accounting in effect. So I've seen some examples and precedents around like cook stoves as a avoided emission type of format that's sort of adjacent to like if a certain number of them are sold, then that means that it removes reliance upon a conventional power plant or like a non-renewable source. And that's kind of similar to the premise of like the base carbon tons, which is I generally associate that renewable energy space with like a kind of BCT, which is not to say that it's not natural carbon where you're pointing at an organism, you're pointing at an ecosystem and saying, here are the ecosystem services. This is what it's doing. You're looking at the production of a renewable infrastructure being an avoided emission, because instead of producing a coal power plant because a hydroelectric dam was produced, that means that much carbon was avoided in its emissions. So I think that, again, not an expert, but probably like at the limit of what is considered like easily quantifiable, in as much as like the basic in as much as the basic accounting for credit and methodology design is around like metric tons of carbon. I've seen those renewable energy format credits basically undergo a pretty high level of scrutiny. So the hydroelectric dam ones, which I'm just picking up as a renewable energy reference, but I understand you're talking about cook stoves, but maybe there's some something that can be transferred between ideas can be transferred between them. Those were considered the challenge of quantifying GHG in renewable infrastructure production basically constituted the lowest bracket of quality that Vera was selling, that in the early era of DeFi meeting climate finance, all those credits were bought up as a way of, quote, sweeping the floor. And there was controversy and things like that spun out of that. I'm not sure if any of that is familiar to you, or if that answers your question.
Yeah. So that's a great starting point. So at the moment, we're leaning quite heavily on I forget the exact name, but the gold standard metered and measured methodology for something. I forget the full name now.
Is it like a renewable energy source, like a cook stove or something? Or
let me find it quickly. So
yeah.
Find it.
Please bring it up. Great.
Yeah, and then just based on that, what we're looking at is improved methodologies and rethinking the whole methodology space. And I think if there's anything that this group is working on, that I would love to be able to support that and work closely with that.
Cool.
Just get okay, so it's gold standard methodology for metered and measured energy cooking devices.
Do you want to screen share for a second? I just gave you the power too, if you like.
Yeah, great.
Cool. Yeah, great. Let's get into it. I love that, actually pulling up the docs. This is fun.
Yeah, let me just get there quickly.
Take your time. While Alwyn's doing that, just to say, Carmen, Arturo, I don't believe we've ever met. I'm Austin. You're welcome to stay silent, video off, but if you want to say hi, I welcome it too. Thanks for coming.
Hi, yeah, I can introduce myself. I probably got to run in a bit, but wanted to say hi. I got introduced to the Regen Network through David Fortson.
Mhm.
We had a conversation about the stuff I'm working on. So I'm a scientist and I founded a company called Earthrise LLC, where I'm trying to focus on scaling of nature-based solutions and regenerative agriculture in particular, and working with an organization in Uganda that is in the process of scaling regenerative agriculture in refugee settlements.
Mm.
And I'm interested in trying to see, well, I mean, first of all, maybe there's methodologies already available to develop to implement ecocredits, or looking into methodology development for that type of method they're using, and then bringing in my science background, what can I do or what can the company do for supporting monitoring and verification of methodology. But I'm still very new to the space, so just trying to understand how it all works, really.
Very cool. Nice to meet you, and I'm glad that you came from a dear recommendation from a dear friend, Dave Forson, part of the community. I have not heard of any precedent of a methodology around regenerative ag, particularly in like a displaced scenario or a resettlement location. Very interested by that. Just I also see that Arturo is like tuned in to say hi, which is great. Do you know of an existing methodology with a precedent that's specifically applied to like regenerative techniques in displaced or resettlement look scenarios? If so, like if you could paste it into the chat or something,
Right.
so that the rest of
Okay.
us could see, it would be awesome.
Let me do that. Yeah, I mentioned the organization that I'm working with is called African Women Rising, and they've been employing a certain methodology called resilience design in the refugee settlement for quite a few decades now, also not only in Uganda, but also other countries in Africa. And they develop manuals for resilience design as well, together with USAID and other organizations. So there's sort of like a formal implementation protocol of what people can do, but just to monitor what the status for developing eco credits. I think that's probably the missing link.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Okay.
Yeah, and hop off as you like. If maybe we can circle back to it if you're still with us. I'm happy to circle back to this conversation while we're doing intros. Arturo, it seems like you're willing to engage, which is awesome. Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, hello, nice to meet you. Well, I got into these conversations because of Jessica Zartler, and yeah, we've been in all this process since April with the GG20, and yeah, we're basically right now working with the University for International Cooperation and Costa Rica Regenerativa, which are two organizations here, like one of the pioneers in teaching about this and bringing regeneration to local communities, and yeah, doing like beautiful work. And so they have methodologies, and now it's like, okay, how can we put this on chain and give value to the communities that are using or that could use this to incentivize regenerative practices. So this is what we're doing right now. In terms of my interest of coming here to hang out with you guys. So I appreciate the space for sure. And I'm gonna go and check out in detail the papers that we were seeing today. So I appreciate you for the space.
Yeah, cool. Well, happy to unpack that too as we have time. Maybe we can, we're juggling, but like Alan, if you want to, if it would be cool to like actually open these up and look through them a little bit to understand where they're coming from, their composition. The four of us, I think, can all resonate together on this. So if you all want to stay on the call or stick around, we can go through them in detail. Maybe I'll pass it to you, Alwyn. And we can start there. Cool.
Yeah, I just gonna need to set my machine up. For some reason, it just the way I was looking for it crashed now. So just give me 5 minutes and then
Yeah, it's no
continue
problem,
with
no problem.
the other
Okay,
concerns.
then I'm going to ask Arturo you a question. Is there a particular kind of like stewardship or regenerative approach that you all are looking at within the context of Costa Rica?
Yeah.
What's the practice? What's the scenario?
Yeah,
If you can give more
in
detail.
Costa Rica, there's a lot of DJ and cattle grazing, right?
Mhm.
These cows, and basically we see a lot of potential also because Costa Rica Regenerativa works with governmental also institutions, and they have developed this Nama Ganaderia, Nama livestock. And so there's a window that doesn't happen that often, that the ministry in Costa Rica has like a good idea around agriculture. So we are really like focusing on that, like grazing, cattle grazing methodologies. And I know that you guys have issued already tokens around other animal practices. I forgot it was like goats or something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sheep
so
grazing hours.
sheep grazing, yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's like happy to see links, and it is this is also a complex topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To say a bit about that. So the sheep methodology that it's not called a sheep methodology, it's called the like fiber shed kilo sheep hour methodology. It probably has a better name than that, but that's the unit that comes out of it. And so that has been the pilot demonstration of a particular credit type called environmental stewardship, where we understand that kind of as an extension of like intercropping, interspecies integrations are creating symbiotic cycles that are ultimately beneficial. So one of the interesting parts of discussing methodologies is particularly in like designing them outside of the box, is that ultimately, well, depending, but most of the time what you're resulting with is a unit. And so this is meant to be like the quantity of sheep per unit time in an area, the kilo sheep hour. And under the hood, the methodology design is in some way an effort to like define and describe a unit. And the particularly like grazing practices like what you're describing are working on longer timelines. Like the outcomes take some time to be able to measure. So the stewardship practices ensuring and being able to verify that environmental stewardship practices are being exercised is a way to try to like ex ante or like pre-finance the credit in a way that might help support in future epochs or at later dates in the monitoring and reporting process. You could begin to actually argue for outcomes, like what had happened. So practices are a kind of a stable container of value as you try to define it through an outcome-based approach. My understanding is that the shifting to cattle ranching in the rainforest in tropical regions is one of the highest forces accelerating deforestation in existence. It's a fundamental tension that farmers or land stewards of various forms have to navigate, is like to resist. It's an obvious and automatic form of money that this entire premise around eco credits, not the entire premise, but a core part of it is to like be able to exert some counter pressure to the economic incentive to just switch over to cattle ranching in tropical regions.
Yeah, totally. There is a lot of pressure, and well, in the activist part, we're in the Pacific, southwest of Costa Rica, which is one of the less developed coastlines in Costa Rica. So it's very also a peninsula. Very focused on how to protect the nature here. So yeah, I appreciate the input, and yeah, it's I wish we had Edward Muller here, which is like one of the this is the founder of the University for International Cooperation, and yeah, so a lot of potential on that for sure, because there's so much. There are so many cows in this country, and anyway, yeah. Alwyn, am I saying your name correct?
Yeah.
Cool. Looks like you found it. Wanna switch over and
indeed,
we can see what comes up.
Yeah. So if you want to, so essentially this has been implemented by a distributor that we're working with closely at the moment, and it works quite well. And we've added additions to it that supports what they require and the way that we want to. So we've enhanced it a bit using causal AI, which is, I think it's separate to having another to having another methodology. But my interest at the moment is what other methodologies should we want to be looking at in terms of energy and supporting the energy space. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear or whether I'm putting this like saying it correctly.
Yeah, I don't know if you necessarily have to sell the question. You can just ask the question, and I think it's a good one. Like how what examples exist of an energy-based argument around emissions versus just solely relying on ecosystem services or ecosystem functions as part of the argument. So I haven't seen, I actually have seen this methodology before. And so I'm curious, what is your understanding of the monitoring process by which they verify how a switch in cooking technology like correlates to reduced emissions? Do you have a sense of like what it looks like in terms of implementation to actually monitor claims around avoided emissions within this methodology?
Yeah, it's essentially it's the fuel purchase itself. And by having an addition, so instead of purchasing charcoal and rather purchasing the specific pellets, the biomass, that makes it, there's already a lot of benefit there. And then by adding the additional metering of the actual cooking sessions, that improves the whole process.
Yeah, it's interesting that in these that part of that, so part of it is in the purchasing of the fuel itself, and another part is that the devices are metered that are being used, which is a kind of like ground truthing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the one context, and this context is already working quite well, and it's very reliable, and it's doing quite well in terms of auditability and, how do you say, not reliability, but verifiability. So the other part is, if one now wanted to move to another area where the methodology is not as well structured and in place as the gold standard methodology, how does one approach that, and where does one go? And I know that as the Regen team has already done, or this group has already done that to a great extent in terms of your space.
Right. If there was I think we are working to get to the point where there's a kind of protocol or a process by which a methodology may be explicitly picked up and like translated to a different context. Currently, the the Regen Network supports project developers. And initially, like how it currently works is that we support project developers contacting and seeing first if it's possible to be able to use the methodology based off of like the IP or how open or closed source the project is. For many scenarios, one of the most active forms of transition or evolution of an existing gold standard methodology in the Regen ecosystem, to specifically say this, is around improving the reliance upon, evolving past and therefore improving upon a reliance for a centralized verifier, a centralized verifier for the reporting and monitoring of additionality, for example. And so this methodology, as I understand it, is an interesting example, in part because it's quite challenging, because the additionality for these systems is working, yes, in like a directly monitoring way, but it's not relying on the same kind of like remote sensing science and DVI indices that an ecosystem services credit design is relying upon. So the verification of the impact of the claim is where the impact verifying body in the methodology design is typically where, you know, the kind of liability or the accountability of the claims in which a credit, the claims of, you know, ecological benefit, like that's where they're verified and vetted. You know, it's where like kind of the potency of an attestation comes from. So I think one of an interesting thing to discuss within this context of cook stoves is like, how could there be potentially greater levels of accuracy in the monitoring or the reporting process in such a way that you might use a decentralized like knowledge graph based approach, which is a larger project, larger like premise that we can discuss. Yeah, thanks for coming, Arturo. Pleasure to meet you. Yeah, that like how to effectively get past that centralized verifier element, because that's the most expensive part, and also the part that allows these centralized registries to maintain their kind of legitimacy and their reputation.
Mm.
So I think one of the guiding principles in looking at this is looking at who is the verifier, what is the role that they're playing, and how might a change in the approach of monitoring and or like practice-based approaches begin to sort of push back on that aspect of the process, because that part of the process has proven to be the prohibitively burdening aspect of the process. And so I'm going out on a limb. Have you looked in this methodology in particular if how impact verification is verified within their existing framework? Do you know anything about how they're specifying that here?
Yeah, I think it's in what I'm realizing also is my knowledge and my understanding of the space is very limited. So a lot of the terminology that you're using, I don't quite follow and don't quite understand.
Well, then I'm happy to.
So
I'm happy to explain any of that. Yeah, no. Is there, please, if I can probe you on that, give me a word or two or like a concept just in general. Was that like a little bit too specific in the language? I could take a couple steps back and say what I just said again from a higher level.
I think maybe let me pose the question again.
Sure.
So what I'm interested in is, at the moment, we have a way of taking the gold standard methodology, the one I shared now, we've got a way to bring that on chain and to create credits from there. And they've been verified by, for example, Berkeley University, and it's seen as very, very good quality. Okay, now we want to go into the next industry. For example, water salination and clean water.
The desalination?
Desalination, sorry, and
yeah, sure.
And solar panels and that space. Where does one start? Are there already methodologies similar to the gold standard one that one could then take and adapt and try to get rid of the centralized part of it and innovate around that? Or where's the best place to start in this?
Yeah, so to the best of my knowledge, the resources that Tica shared at the beginning around those registry resources are our current body of precedents of methodologies to look through. So the immediate answer is the main body of methodologies that one can draw upon is collected in that resource that's pasted at the high up on the chat. That's under the registry
document. Welcome to Regen Registry.
Right. And there's a portion of it that is a collection of all of the methodology resources that we've put together to date. My suggestion is to see what is the closest to water desalination or solar. I imagine almost assuredly there's a solar credit in there, and the best place to look is how is the verification process happening within that, say, solar methodology, and specifically trying to level up the process to see how could a decentralized verification process be able to be competitive with what the verifier in the current solar methodology is doing. And it might not be competitive, but it might be significantly more affordable, thinking through what is the affordability, like making an argument in a new methodology around perhaps the way data is collected or structured, its ontology, so to speak, the nature of the data being gathered, as building an argument to have a counter proposal to the centralized verification process that makes use of blockchain transparency, claim attestations, like signing on-chain anchors as the sort of pivot point. That's the sort of argument around how to evolve or improve it.
The language starts to make sense to me now.
Okay. Yeah. So the practices, whether those be stewarding a forest or proving that people are switching fuel types in their cook stoves, proving that because the credit was purchased, that behavior would not have changed unless the purchase was made, which is to say that the credit purchase is directly corresponding. It's not like it would have happened anyway, which is a very perverse incentive, because people who have been continuously being stewards, therefore they can't prove additionality, which is verifying that because the credit was purchased, that regenerative work happened, and it would not have happened otherwise. So if people are doing that in an unpaid way or in an ongoing way because it's part of a life plan or part of their identity at a more fundamental level, then additionality is much more difficult to prove, which is sets up a problematic scenario where those who have been doing it for a long time and continue to do the work aren't rewarded, and those who are kind of doing one-off schemes can
get largely rewarded. And so so what would one probably try to do then is say, if this steward was to be taken away and out of that ecosystem, what would happen? And would that be like a way to try and understand the additionality?
Well, could be. So, okay, if a is if a steward, say in some scenarios, the stewards are guardians, like they're protecting from encroachment. So some of the questions around additionality that we've worked with in our Keystone biodiversity credits are turning towards biodiversity and the indicators of keystone species as a way of understanding the overall ecological health in context. Rather than saying if this indigenous community wasn't there, would a balsa tree logging company come in and clear cut stands of primary forest? It's almost impossible to say if they weren't there, then Exxon would build a road in and begin extraction of some kind, because it's assuming patterns of extractive behavior are going to happen unless there's resistance to it. So we've opted to basically try to develop a new set of credit classes which don't rely on carbon additionality as the source of their legitimacy, because it's just a kind of bankrupt argument in the first place, and that biodiversity credits and clear indication of indicator species is a way to prove that stewardship, like that stewardship is happening. If that
this is
makes sense.
powerful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And I know everybody's coming back soon.
Yeah.
How would I go about, how do I contribute back? How do I contribute to this, to the EcoCredit Builder Lab?
Thank you for asking that question. That's really awesome. I'm going to broadcast to the others, just like that. Hey. So Alan just asked a question: how can he contribute and how can he give back to this EcoCredit Builder Lab?
What a lovely question.
Keep in mind that I've got very little understanding and experience at this stage. Austin's been very generous with these, toning it down and bringing it to my level. So thank you for that.
Sure.
But so the introduction is there now, and I'm hoping to be able to continue with this, joining the Builder Lab and contributing.
I think go ahead, Austin.
That's the short answer. Come back again and
yeah,
talk with us again.
Yeah, and tell us what questions you have. I feel like it's really helpful for us to say, you know, like this is something that's confusing to me, like this topic, or telling us kind of like what you're seeing other folks having confusions around. I think that is really useful.
Is there precedent within the registry's partnerships to date around renewable energy credits related to cook stoves or solar being precedented?
No, it doesn't fall under kind of the definition that we're using in nature-based solutions. But we at Regen are kind of, we're like, I feel like we're going through a bit of a transformation where through Regen Registry, you have these nature-based solutions, but we also offer technical services for like really any type of regenerative credit to be developed and listed on the marketplace. So that's something that we can totally explore, and that we're trying to open wide the gates for development of lots of different types of eco credits. Yeah, even outside of Regen Registry. So happy to jam on that. I think that would actually be a really cool next session, is like talking about just like what do we even offer outside of maybe like the methodology development, you know, like more of the technical services potentially.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, Becca, if you didn't already see in the chat, Alwyn has posted I think it's the gold standard credit that is being cited, and we were just discussing the perverse incentive space and sort of the core challenges around additionality. But it's definitely like a really big sector that seems like worth discussing. I guess I'm already in the middle of sharing back. We had 3 folks, Carmen, Arturo, and Alwyn in our group. Alwyn and I have been discussing a gold standard credit around renewable energy transitions around cook stoves and monitoring cook stoves, metered cook stove approach, and looking at how might a decentralized approach take on the question of additionality and the sort of challenge of that, particularly related to renewable energy credits. And we discussed a bit about a hydroelectric dam or avoided emissions through renewable energy projects, and what might like an evolution of those credits look like, and how might that leverage knowledge graphs or a decentralized verification approach. Yeah, very, very interesting. How was you all's insetting supply chain conversation?
It was really interesting. Some things, like, it was personally very helpful for me because I got a different frame of thinking around this, where insetting may be a way to do better accounting, like looking at a way on an accounting system that basically correlates data from all sides and also demands better accounting system from corporations and brands. Gregory had some really nice points on it. And it was nice to hear Luke's experience working with TGI and the brands that they work with. And I wonder if anybody else wants to share more what happened.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we were, one of the things that emerged out of this, or that I was sort of proposing, is that there's kind of a taxonomy of, in quotes, credit approaches, and insetting is an attempt to accomplish sort of to make ecological actions within a corporate supply chain or within a specific community context legible according to a consensus around standard that's within that and meets accounting standards. So in like a corporate environment, this is a shift from just reporting to accounting on ecological impact processes. But when we use the word credit, in this case, we're using the word credit in terms of that there's trust. It's more like credit in terms of my credit score than it is credit in terms of like a tradable carbon offset. And then if you move up a level and you're trying to generate market confidence in a fungible asset, you're going to different people to generate whatever the accounting standard is, probably. And so we were starting to explore sort of like, are there levels from sort of like a base level community stewardship credit in which you're generating consensus about right relationship between actions and outcomes and data management, right, at that base level, and then maybe another layer up where you're creating a set of stakeholders who say, cool, according to our accounting standards, you could make claims and you can bring this on your balance sheet in the following ways, and you can take these actions, you meet your corporate commitments, and then another layer up, which is like, cool, this is qualifying for sort of, international fungible exchange, and a carbon market, for instance, or nature, net positive nature commitments or something like that. And that the fundamental difference between those layers is the stakeholders who are engaged in governing the accounting standard, right? We also explored a little bit that sometimes using the word credit to describe all 3 of those layers is counterproductive. It's like we understand between all of us that when we use the word credit, we're talking about the creation of a unit according to an agreed upon and community governed standard of quantification and monitoring, right? But that when we use the word credit, many people leap directly to sort of like specific approaches like Red Plus or something like that. So anyway, that's my sort of summary of some of the, especially some of the things that I was sharing to try to help frame things out. It's a very exciting conversation. And the last thing I'll say is, I think by and large in insetting crediting approaches, we're, credits themselves are unlikely to be what's being sold. There are accounting services, verification services, data services, project management services that get sold, but the credit itself is sort of like an accountant worthy unit that is measuring the success of the delivery of those services, really. So you don't have a marketplace for the credits itself. You probably more have a marketplace for services, like the great work that Terra Genesis International does, right? Where you're working with a corporate to achieve these goals, and you're up, doing accounting standards. So
Very interesting. Cool. Thanks for laying it out. Last group.
Somebody, you want to share about our little corner?
Yes. We had a very good conversation around the Ecocredit methodology that we are trying to develop at GVK and Redis. And it was more around, because it is difficult to kind of quantify practice-based approaches. So how should we approach the monitoring and verification part of it? And yeah, Giselle had really valuable feedback around it in terms of to specify the details of say, if it comes to verification, then when we are writing a methodology, how much of specification should we be providing there, and it makes sense to lay out what is the role of, say, each verifier in terms of what are they going to do. Similarly, in monitoring plan, what are the metrics and some explanation around it. It's just good to know that while writing the methodology, if we provide these specifics, it's helpful, because then when we are actually creating a report, it's not very different from the methodology that we have generated. So it was really helpful.
I feel like too, it's such a testament to like how much can be accomplished just with a short collaborative moment, that we can just like have a touch base, work through some things, you all go back to the ground, and developing it. So I'm really glad that you made that direct ask, Suma, and that was helpful last time. I think it's a great way to have kind of a workshopping corner in these calls.
I mean,
Yeah, it was really helpful, Becca. Thanks a lot.
That's precisely why we're doing this. That's awesome. I'm glad you all got like a dedicated focus, and Alwyn and I got time on to like actually look through a methodology and discuss like the next steps. So I think
just to add to that,
please,
it was quite
please.
It's really comforting to understand that you're able to take me through the basics and talk me from the ground up, and we could find a connection point somewhere. So that's great. Thank you. I look forward to future sessions.
Thank you for coming, everyone. And thanks for listening to this recording, if you're listening to the recording.
Well, thanks everybody.
Thanks.